right, let's do it. All right, well, this is officially episode number 3 of the Yucaipa 360 podcast, and today is particularly exciting because for the first time, we're recording here in the city's new media room, which will serve also as the recording studio for the Yucaipa 360 podcast. This turned out beautiful. Our public hats off to our public works department who did most of the putting together of this room. But as beautiful as this room is, what's almost more beautiful about it is how much this space cost our general fund. Phil, can you tell me, do you know exactly how much general fund money we spent on this studio?
Being that PEG fees are eligible to pay for it, I'm guessing that the number is, I don't know. I'm guessing that the number is right around zero.
Zero, that's right. $0 spent on this beautiful room. Yes, there is something called PEG, which is Public, Educational, and Governmental, is what it stands for. And it is 1% of the franchise fees we all pay on our cable utility, our cable bills, right? And that money flows to local governments, but it can only be, it's very restricted, it can only be spent on capital that is used to educate the public and involve the public through television or similar channels, right? And so most cities spend it on audio-video equipment. Some cities have like a cable access TV station or a city-run TV station. We don't have that here in Yucaipa. But so this podcast format, the whole intent is, look, we got to reach people differently now. It used to be in government, you could just send out a press release and that was enough. That doesn't work anymore. So we have to reach people the way that they receive and digest information. It's about transparency. It's about communicating with the public. And so those PEG funds are a perfect match for this. So this room, all the equipment, PEG fees, a lot of the room itself, capital improvement project funds, not a penny spent out of the general fund, which is beautiful. So you may have heard, as our finance director, I don't know if you have, that we're running a deficit.
Right. Heard something about it.
Okay. So, we have to be very cautious, particularly how we spend our general fund dollars. So had we, certainly not something we could have done building this space out if we'd had to use our general fund dollars.
Yeah.
So.
As the finance director, I am the least excited about both the audio and the visual capabilities of this room. So I'm excited to be here though today.
Yeah, we're excited to have you because we have something really important to talk about today as we approach November 5th, which is a big election day nationwide, but very big election day in the city here. And one of the things on the ballot is a sales tax Measure S.
The community has a big choice to make in November. We have Measure S on the ballot.
Yep.
And not to overstate it or be dramatic, but it's really going to shape what Yucaipa looks like into the future. And so it's a big decision, and we're putting in the work to make sure that the community has all of their questions answered, all the education that they need to make an informed decision. So the reason why we're doing it is just for that, so that the community can be informed, get through the emotion of the realization of where we are as a city financially, and then they have questions as to how we got here, how once it's fixed, how we're not going to get back in the same spot in the future, and but the best part about the roadshow has been the question and answer period that we try to have at every one. And so it's a short presentation, and then we just open it up, and people start peppering us with questions, and we do our best to give them the answers. If we don't have the answers, we're getting the information, posting it on our website. So that part's been helpful.
Yeah, it's interesting. We, as always, get a lot of comments on social media, and we're going to go through some of those in a little bit here. But it seems to me that whether on social media or at city council meetings, or we had a special community meeting last week on this topic, or during your presentations out in the community, and after a while, we kind of stop hearing unique questions, right? I mean, it's people tend to have similar thoughts and similar questions on the topic. So I think it's going to be important for us to hit on those and answer those, and we'll do that in a little bit. But what kind of reactions were you getting out in the community?
Yeah, so overwhelmingly, I mean, the going into it, we can sense distrust. There's a total distrust between the community. They're They're making sure that we have.
I wouldn't take it personally, Phil.
I don't. I've been an accountant for a long time, and people don't like numbers to start with. And when they're bad numbers, they ask lots of questions, and they start with, "I don't believe you."
Right, and we're from the government. We're here to help. Right. That's people have a healthy distrust of government, and I think we've seen so many examples of waste at the state and federal levels, especially that when any level of government comes to the public and says, gosh, we need more money. I think the knee-jerk reaction is to say, yeah, tighten your belt.
Absolutely, yeah. Right. Especially with the history of Yucaipa and the narrative that's been out there forever that Yucaipa's flush. It's got a healthy general fund and healthy reserves, and so that's sometimes the information is eye-opening. So distrust, range of emotions. On the positive side, what we've been getting as a reaction is a lot of pride in the services that are provided in town, and so people like Yucaipa. Residents in Yucaipa they're proud to live in Yucaipa, and they like the stuff that Yucaipa has, and so that's been positive. Is the services that are provided. The interpretation that I've got is people enjoy those, and as we go through and say, hey, this is where we are. We either have to fund them or cut them. They've got a list of saying, please don't cut this one, please don't cut that one, please don't cut these.
Yeah, and that jives with polling results we received a few months ago. We did some polling on this topic on the front end before we did a lot of the communications on the topic that we've done over the last 2-3 months. And I was kind of surprised to see that first of all, one of the questions had to do with, do you believe the city is in need of additional revenue sources? And that answer came back, yes. A significant majority of people understood that, which was a surprise to me because, as you mentioned, for so long in Yucaipa, there has been this narrative that, fiscally sound city, we don't take on debt, we pay everything cash. At one point, the city was ranked, the least likely city to ever declare bankruptcy, which I think is still true because we don't carry debt, right? But you've had this narrative for so long that the city's budget is healthy, and then all of a sudden, that narrative changes, and people are shocked by it. Some people are instantly distrustful of it, and it's been a heavy lift, and largely by you and your department of trying to explain to people, no, here's the reality of the situation. Here's what the numbers are, and by the way, this didn't happen overnight. Here's how we got to where we are today over a long period of time, and it's interesting. I've seen a number of people come to multiple of these meetings, and initially it was shock and how can this be? And at some point, you start to see the acceptance and the reality sink in. And okay, well, all right, how are we going to fix it?
Yeah, I hope so. We've been putting the work in. We've created trends, graphs. We're updating those things all the time. Updating our frequently asked questions, and really working with the community to understand their questions where it's unclear. Providing the how we got here. I mean, we can spend hours and hours on the how we got here.
Okay, let's do it.
Please, no.
This is
no more.
This is a long format podcast. Let's talk about that. Hopefully not for hours and hours, but for a little while here, because I think it's important for people to understand it's this did not happen overnight, and in fact the signs were there, right? You alluded to some confusion over that, how did we get here?
Yeah, so you mentioned that the narrative with Yucaipa is healthy general fund and healthy reserves, and so one of the challenges is that narrative didn't start yesterday. It didn't start a week ago. It started at the furthest I went back, although I've been in town longer, is 2003 from a financial standpoint. Yeah. And the narrative back then, that was the narrative, and 22 years ago, that probably was exactly the case. And so, with financial management, with good financial management, it's not a set it and forget it. And so you got to revisit that not only annually, but continuously over the course of time. And so if people said, oh, 2003, we're good, I'm going to go ahead and check out. And then you don't hear anything until the city comes to you in fiscal 25 and says, hey, we got a problem. You're going, hey, wait a second. I thought we were
But there were indications very publicly. I mean, and we'll talk about, 4 years ago, there was Measure E, which was a sales tax measure, which failed. It was explained very differently, right? And in my view, not adequately, right? But there were indications going back years. To illustrate the origins of this problem, your team has put together quite a bit of data. Let's take a look at one trend here. So this shows starting in 2003, as you mentioned, kind of where we were, citywide fund equity. So this is all city assets, right?
Yeah, citywide.
Maybe walk us through this.
Yeah, so this is not fund specific. This is all funds. So general fund, all the special revenue funds, all the capital projects funds, everything we've got, all rolled into one, and it's equity. So it's for a single year, it would be revenues minus expenses, and then you accumulate that over the course of time. Right. So it's accumulated equity, and it's a trend graph starting in 2003. The reason we started in 2003 is the accounting model changed for governments in 2003. So before that, it's not really an apples to apples comparison. So we started there.
And for those who are just listening to this podcast, because this is presented on YouTube, so it's video, but it's also audio only. If you get your podcasts on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can hear it there. So some people are listening instead of watching. So what we're looking at here is a graph. It looks like a mountain, right? It looks like you're skiing down the side of a mountain. At the top of the mountain is 2008, 2009. And as you move forward in time, you're skiing downhill. And then about 2016, 2017, you start skiing down, very sharply, right? 2020, all of a sudden there's a bump up, right? Mm-hmm. And there are reasons for that. That's an anomaly, a one-time money anomaly. But having kind of painted that picture for our listeners, please continue with the description.
Yeah, so if we were to break this mountain into four sections, the first uphill section, this is times the surplus for the city. It goes from fiscal 03. If we were to carry this backwards, there would be surpluses as well. That's how we got the $35 million in 2003. But it goes uphill up through 2008. So that's times the surplus citywide, again, all funds. And we're going up. So that's what I've been coining the glory days of Yucaipa, and that's kind of where the narrative started of the city's flush and can make decisions on, hey, how do we want to spend our reserves?
Right. And at that peak, 2008, 2009, the reserves got up to $70 million.
Yeah, I think
$70 million.
Yeah, just eclipsed it. Just went just over $70 million. Yeah. And again, that's not $70 million in fiscal 25 numbers. That's $70 million in fiscal 08 numbers.
Right.
So
it would be a lot more in today money.
Oh yeah, right? Yeah. And so at that point in time, oh man, I should have this number. But our general fund budget number, that was probably, I don't know. I'm going to say a number, and I'd say roughly $10 million of costs in 08. And so if you've got reserves of 70, you're saying, hey, we can bring in no money for the next 7 years and still operate. And so, yeah, it's a significant, that's why the narrative of Yucaipa being flush, I mean, in fact it was. So then we level off there in 08, 09, and then we start that downhill ski, all the way across. So that's what I've been calling our building period, and what the strategy was in that time frame was to build infrastructure. So over that course of time, we'll see it in another slide, but over $225 million was added. And so from 08 all the way through fiscal 20, we're sliding downhill. That's our building period, and we made the decision. City Council made the decision to build infrastructure throughout the city. And so over the course of the 22 years, 03 to 25, we spent over $225 million in infrastructure projects. So as we slide down, we're spending a lot of money on building infrastructure, and we're using our reserves.
Building what? Now, I know the answer to this question, but I think it's important for people to hear, because look, government's job isn't to stockpile money, right? So in one respect, it makes sense that if the city is sitting on a lot of money, okay, let's build things that will be amenities to the residents, right? And this city built some pretty amazing amenities, to be fair, right? I mean, incredible parks, performing arts center, a fire station, police station, community center, things that really benefit this community and that our residents enjoy.
Yeah, and things that aren't necessarily seen all the time too, like basins and
Correct.
and those things. While they're not as fancy as a YPAC, they provide a tremendous community benefit, and they're really expensive to build.
Well, and then once you build something, you have to maintain it, or at least you should.
At least you should.
And you know, in the instance of facilities, you got to staff them too, and so you know it makes it hard. When times get lean, unless you want to shutter those facilities and lay off the staff, you know, if you want to continue operating those facilities, you have to have the staff to operate them.
You have to have the staff to operate them, and even though you pay for these things with reserves, and you're not taking external debt, you have to contemplate how are we gonna operate these things? How are we gonna maintain these things when they start needing repairs? How are we gonna repair these things? This is over 20 years, and so buildings don't last forever. YPAC's newer than that, but City Hall, as an example, it needs repairs from time to time. YPAC is a brand new building. We had the AC go out at the YPAC, and so things come up, and those ongoing operating costs are not where you pay the bill to build it and they go away. No, now you have to operate it, you have to maintain them, and so it makes the Yucaipa machine a bigger machine, and your operating costs, your support costs to operate the city need to go up commensurate with that to keep providing an equivalent level of service along the way.
Right.
So we entered that period, and we started sliding down, and that trend continues to 20. It blips up, and it blips up not because we stopped spending. It blipped up because of other things. One is fiscal 20, COVID happened. And when COVID happened, what that meant was for municipalities, they got free money. They got federal money. It's termed ARPA, and the city of Yucaipa got between $8 and $9 million of free money, one-time money, and so it pushed our revenues up. And
Right.
so it exceeded costs for that standpoint. Coincidentally, we also got grant funding, $8-9 million of grant funding, one-time money again from SBCTA, and so that helped the cause. Again, one-time money, and then with COVID, especially on the community service side, but really the city as a whole contracted on the programming and the services provided, and so there was a squeeze of costs, a one-time squeeze because we were working through lockdowns and all of that.
Yeah.
And so the costs were squeezed. We had a revenue inflow, and that anomaly it spiked back up, and so our equity, our citywide equity, went back up.
You know, it's interesting. So COVID hit. I was managing another city at the time in 2020. And when COVID hit, the initial reaction of local governments was, oh my gosh, this is the apocalypse, right? All businesses are shutting down. Sales tax is going to stop. All the revenue streams are going to dry up. And we need to pull back on all of our service levels. Ironically, COVID ended up being a financial boon to most cities, right? Because we got this American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA funding. In the case of Yucaipa, it was $8 million of one-time money, and that's primarily the blip we see here, right? It's the city was heading quickly towards this fiscal cliff. Then ARPA happened, bailed the city out for a few years.
Yeah, it covers up issues for sure.
Well, and while where a lot of cities use that ARPA funding to purchase things, help build parks, purchase equipment, vehicles, et cetera, all kinds of projects. In Yucaipa, that funding was really used to plug the gap, right? Because I remember one of the first times you and I met when I was starting here, and I had gone through the budgets, and we sat down and we were talking, and I said, well, I got a couple questions, a couple things that just jumped out at me as I've been reviewing past budgets. First of all, it seems like we're balancing this budget on one-time revenues, namely ARPA funding. And you kind of smiled. And, yep. And I also noticed these loans from the general fund to our development impact fee, or DIF funds. And I commented that it looks like also the general fund is showing balanced only because of these loans are showing as, payable to the general fund, right? And you again smiled and said yes. And so, and that's a whole nother topic. But back to ARPA and the budget, I think that bailed the city out. I think had COVID not happened, we would have been having this conversation, or the city would have been having this conversation very loudly 4 years ago.
No doubt. I think that's what the trend shows. We did have a small contraction of costs related to COVID, where especially on the community services side, but that blip is certainly the result of a revenue inflow, and so it masks issues. Money doesn't fix everything in life, but in municipal finance, money fixes things. And so you can get away with all of this stuff. We can get away with that stuff in 2009 and 2010 because we have so much in reserves. As we get closer and closer to that zero, that horizontal axis, we're out of options. And COVID pushed this conversation forward. It turns out from 20 to now, and so for 4 years it hid the blemishes of the city of Yucaipa for sure. I agree with that.
Okay.
The last little box there, it's shaded, and the reason it's shaded is it's based on budgeted numbers, estimates, projections. So everything in the dark blue is all based on actuals. And so as we're looking at all of these graphs that we've put together, different financial statements mean different things, and so historical audited financial statements is all on the left side, all the dark blue. The right side, that small box is based on projected estimates, budget information. And so that's important to note too for the user, that one is actuals, one is projected. But you can see ARPA money's gone. We don't have any more to program. We've spent it all. That one-time SBCTA money was one time, right. And we're back in cranking on the community services side. And so, with the reduction of revenues and back to business as usual on the cost side, we're having the conversation now to say how do we stop this trend that's been going on for the better of 20 years.
And if we don't stop it, if we were to change nothing and continue down this path, the projections show that we run out of money by 2028, 2029.
Yeah. And so I mean, we're having a conversation now, which is not a fun conversation, but it's a proactive conversation that we're not saying, hey, we're out of options and now we can't pay our bills. We're saying, hey, we're projecting that we're going to run out of money. I still, to your earlier comment of least likely to go bankrupt, we're not going to. We're going to make good decisions as a community and not do that. We're not flying blind here. We're working with the community. We're working hard with the community to say, hey, what do you want? If you like all the stuff that's being provided, we've got to pay for it and help us fix this trend.
Right. You brought some slides with you to show us. Let's take a look at those.
Yeah. So I talked about that building period, and so we'll kick off with the big dollar one. So this one is from our development services director. This is our 2003 through 23 capital improvement program project funding sources. The question of, hey, what were we building during the building period? Over on the right, that's a bunch of bullets of all the different things that Yucaipa built over the course of time. And then that total, the $211 million that's totaling is, it excludes about $15 million of the YPAC. A significant piece of the YPAC is excluded from that number. So you add in the other $15 million, and it's better than $225 million of infrastructure over that 20-year period. And so you say, all right, $225 million over 20 years, we're spending more than $10 million a year on capital. That's a lot for somebody the size of Yucaipa. Right. And that explains why that during that building period, we're just skiing downhill.
Okay.
And so this is important to note that Little Yucaipa has added $250 million of infrastructure and stuff to the city. It's a much bigger place than it was 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. If we go to the next slide, this is our capital, and so 225 total. This is how it breaks out over the years. And so back in 2003, those horizontal lines represent $10 million. 2003, we spent about $14 million in capital. You work all the way across and it's equals at $226 million. It's capital is typically one time, so it ebbs and flows. As we go through, the other things that are going on, because we weren't just doing capital, we still are providing community services and development services. This is our spending layer with community services. Way back in 2003, when everything was great and Yucaipa was fiscally conservative and had great reserves, our spending was $835,000. If we adjusted that for inflation, I was very scientific with this. I Googled how much is $835,000 worth today if we had that, and the number is $1.4 million. And so inflation adjusted, if we were doing the exact same thing in 2003 as we are now, that number would be 1.4. What we budgeted in 25 is $7.7 million. And what that tells me is we ramped up our service level. We in between 2003 and 25, we were doing a lot more. I don't know what that is, about 4 times the amount of the services. The levels of services are 4 times higher than they were in 2003.
Now, before people panic here and have heart attacks over the fact that we spend $7.7 million on community services, let me just point out that this includes also some things that have some significant cost recovery to them, right? So, for example, the STARS program, which is 100% fully funded, the after-school program, that's a significant chunk of money.
A couple million
dollars that actually cost the city nothing, right? Because it's fully funded through a grant that flows through the school district to us. This also is just the spending side. This isn't the revenue side at all. So, we know that community services has gotten much better at cost recovery to the extent that even though we're spending $7.7 million this year, the net cost is only about $2 million. Right?
Yeah, little less.
Little under $2 million. Yeah. And so, and we continue to work towards increasing cost recovery with the ultimate goal of community services having a net cost of 0. So we're moving that direction. So I don't want people to see $7.7 million and saying, "Oh my gosh, well there's your deficit right there, wipe it out," right? Because that wouldn't solve the problem.
No, this is just the spending size. But what this does show is the size of the city, the size of the operation. And so community services, that department has worked extremely hard to do the best they possibly can on the cost recovery side. And and if the number's like 75%, I mean, that's unheard of for a municipal community services department.
And what you mean by that is 75% is what is being recovered. Where if you go back 2 years ago, I think we were in the 30s, right? And how do we get cost recovery? There are a number of ways. One way, let's talk about the YPAC, is that our net cost this year for the YPAC is about $500,000. Mm-hmm. A couple of years ago, it was a lot more than that, right? How have we gotten there? Well, we're renting out the facility a lot. You can rent out the YPAC for a wedding, for a homecoming. Our school districts are renting out for homecoming dances, for bar mitzvahs, whatever it is. And so that's generating revenue. We're decreasing certain expenses by not bringing in programming that is, very expensive and won't cost recover in and of itself, right? And so festivals, we put on festivals. We just had Autumn Fest. It was an amazing event. We've got nothing but positive response from it. One of the best attended Autumn Fests the city has ever had. Well, we're going to do better than break even, I believe, when the final numbers come in. And community services has had to, take back under the city's control things that generate revenue, right? Mm-hmm. And not everyone's happy about that because we had been giving those things away, right? Nonprofits have been able to come in and, for example, sell alcohol, right? Well, we can't continue to have these events if they're huge financial drains on the city. We have to move towards cost recovery to continue having them. So we have to capture those things that are revenue generators. Right? Yep. We can't afford to give them away, or else we can't have the events at all. So great job by community services in working towards cost recovery.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. The festival side, those aren't a significant cost anyways. And it's just such a feel good thing for the community. And the most recent one, yeah, it was well attended. We went one night. We had a blast. And I think you're right. I think that officially we'll come in better than break even. And Megan does a great job with that group and has made it such a focus to her best with all of her programs. It's not they do more than just the YPAC, more than just special events. They've got 12, 13 different things that they're doing on each one of them. They're working their tails off to make sure that they're doing their best on the cost recovery side.
If you think about all of the fields, the sports programming that we have in the city, all the activities at the community center, all the activities at the senior center, I mean, the scope of what they provide is enormous.
It's enormous, and the moving to a it sounds great. Move to a cost recovery model, but every group that she's working with has a different understanding of what that means. And so specifically with the fields, there was an opportunity there to say, hey, if fields are being unused, we can rent them out to external users. But what that meant was we need to tighten the scope of when those fields are being used and working with our partners to say, hey, tell us when you're not going to use them and really tighten up your schedule. When you're not going to use them, we want to use them. And working through that that dialogue and that education process it's a massive lift. And so hats off to Megan for sure.
Anytime there's change, people get nervous.
Absolutely.
Right? And I think there was a lot of fear that the city was trying to push out certain user groups, Yucaipa baseball, Little League, for example. Absolutely not the case, right? But the fact of the matter was, Little League had reserved those fields for a whole bunch of days that they weren't actually using them. So
yeah, months, just month blocks.
Right. So if we have fields sitting vacant, not taking any time away from Little League as an example, we have the opportunity to bring in other leagues that will pay to use those fields to offset the city's costs without taking anything away from the groups that are currently using it. And that really was the goal there.
Yeah, it is. And so that's one little slice of community services. Yeah. Bottom line is we've ramped up the cost side, about 4 times levels of service. And so, I mean, we've talked a lot about community services. City does a lot of other stuff. It just is a reinforcement of the city is a much bigger place than it was in 2003.
If I can kind of reinforce one of the comments you made there, just so we glean as much understanding out of this slide as we can, right? Yeah, very important to point out that a lot of these costs are offset by revenue recovery. However, the gross number here is still very important to realize is that just because these are offset by cost recovery, we're still supporting, from a support perspective of the city, a $7.7 million budget. Just because a significant portion of that is offset by revenues doesn't make it less of a service to support, right? In fact, it actually makes it more, right? And so
you have to support the revenue coming back in as well,
right? So the gross is still,
which is why we need a deputy director of finance.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, but so it's still important to say, you look at that inflation adjusted 1.4 to 7.7, right? We HR, finance, IT, really our support services ramped up in kind of
correct
relative terms. Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's gross.
It is. Yeah. So from a net cost standpoint, less than $2 million, but from a stuff that's being done by the city, massive amount growth just on community services.
Right. That's
not the only service area that we increase. So this is development services, and this really I called it development services, but it includes community development, public works, building and safety, code. I think I'm missing one, but in 2003, same calculation, we spent $2.4 million. Inflation adjusted, that's $4.1 million, and in 25, our budgeted amount is $9 million. So we more than doubled service levels in this development services, and so the point here, the takeaway is service levels went up 4 times in community services, development services it doubled. There's an offset here in development services as well from a cost recovery standpoint.
Yes.
But gross cost, what the city is doing, the service levels doubled in this one service area.
Right.
In our next service area, this is public safety.
Yeah. This is striking. Look, public safety is the biggest thing we do here in Yucaipa. We spend 63% of our budget this year on public safety services. You know, in all cities, public safety is the number one priority, or should be, right? Yucaipa acknowledges that. Not all cities do, right? But it is the number one thing as government that we should be doing. And so it is right that we spend more money on public safety than anything else. However, the costs for public safety have grown exponentially, not just in Yucaipa, but everywhere, particularly in California, right? And we have limited ability to control those costs because, you know, we contract with the Sheriff's Department for our police services and with CAL FIRE for our fire services. So we don't negotiate those contracts, right? Those contracts are negotiated up in Sacramento for CAL FIRE and at the county for the Sheriff's Department. We can't control salaries or benefits or how the shifts work, right? The only way we can control it is by increasing or reducing the number of personnel that are included in the contract, right? So unless we want to reduce the number of sheriff deputies on the streets of Yucaipa or reduce the number of firefighters serving Yucaipa, we do not control what these costs are. And that goes, I mean, that's really across the board in California. Everyone's been experiencing that. But the I mean, just since I've been here, I think, you know, the first year that I was here, the first budget, the cost for our police and fire contracts combined went up like $3 million.
Yeah. Well, they're big. The baseline's big, right? And so with the large baseline, it doesn't take much of a percentage, and the numbers get really large. The incremental increases year after year. What was crazy to me as I was putting these together was the 2003 spending, because you say, that's the primary purpose of municipal government is to provide public safety, but in 2003. We actually spent more on support services than we did for public safety. So we spent $5 million in support, and our public safety spend was $4.9 million in 2003. And so, so that was crazy. So yeah, if it's 60-something% this year, it was less than 50, significantly less than 50 back in 2003. But inflation adjusted, that's $8.4 million from 22 years ago. Our spend this year is $23.5 million. And so we're just under 300 or 3 times the size from a service level standpoint, from a quantifiable dollar standpoint, 3 times the service level for public safety. And that gets back to what you're saying. It goes up for everybody. I'm not saying that we have 3 times as many deputies as we did in 2003, but the cost of delivering that service is 3 times higher, inflation adjusted, than it was back then. So it's a massive. I mean, if you just say, okay, we're gonna shift things and we're gonna fix budgets and we're gonna fix things, I mean, there's no way to avoid public safety, and when we look through, you know, meaningful changes, they've got to be part of the conversation, because that's where it's all spent.
Let's jump ahead. I want to you brought a slide that showed that support services side of it. Let's take a look at that, because this is impactful for me. Now we've talked about how you know, the net cost for support services in the city is 9% of our budget, right? I can't think of another city that's that low. I mean, I think usually if you get to 20-25%, you're doing pretty great, you know. 9% support services.
So yeah, I'd say, you know, under 20%, and it starts feeling lean because of what that means. And really, support services, you've got to create an internal control system and monitor that and make sure that it's running an efficient process. And if you get less than 20, that means it might be too lean.
Well, we need certain checks and balances in government, right? Yeah. We need to divide functions so that you don't have any one person controlling too many of the same functions. It opens up the possibility of bad things happening, and in fact, that did happen here in Yucaipa years ago.
Yeah, that's worst case scenario, and that's something that that did happen here and in my department, and
before you were here.
Thank you. Yeah, but it did occur, and it's not. While it's surprising that it occurs, it's not surprising that there's an opportunity there. If you're too lean, there's an opportunity for bad things to happen. But this was a crazy number. So we just to recap, we had $250 million added in infrastructure over 22 years. We had a 400% 26% increase in service levels for community services, a doubling of development services, a tripling of public safety services, all inflation adjusted. And then when we do the same calc for inflation adjusted for support services, we actually have a decrease. So we spent $5 million in 03, inflation adjusted, that's $8.6 million. And our fiscal year 25 spend for the supporting services is 6.3. So we are spending 26% less supporting our services for 300% more public safety, 400% more community services, 200% more development services, and $250 million of infrastructure that's been added.
Right.
This tells me that whatever that thin green strip is in between where we started in 03 to 25, jumping 25 years and decreasing it 26% means that in order for that to make sense, Yucaipa would have to be like it'd have to be like Calico, a ghost town or something. Nobody's here anymore.
Right.
And to say that, no, we've built all this stuff and we have all these really nice things and top-notch public safety too, but we're absolutely under supporting, and we've always, that's the Yucaipa way, is under support everything. And if you need more money, squeeze the support and make it all work. So
Well, do more with less was kind of the philosophy here, right? And I think that's, I mean, to a certain extent, that's just responsible government, right? Too often we see bloated bureaucracies, right? Certainly the opposite was true here in Yucaipa. And while it's good to be cautious and conservative fiscally with taxpayer dollars, you get to a point where it becomes dangerous. You know, when I started here, I was really surprised at some of the really gaping holes in the city organization, right? We had no HR department. There was an HR professional here at one time who left, and instead of that person being replaced, an administrative assistant was handed the duties.
Yeah.
Right. That's a huge liability for a city of this size. Risk management. There was no official risk management function. There wasn't, and is still not, a procurement officer, right? A purchasing officer, because we can't afford it, right? Ryan, you got here, was it 2020?
Yep, 2020.
Describe for me what the finance department was like in 2020.
Yeah, I mean, understaffed would kind of be the, an understated way of putting it. And I think that would be kind of the general consensus of all departments here, right? I can
Sure.
speak directly for finance, but the amount of work that really all staff, but especially department heads and stuff was absolutely incredible. And that's why I like these slides here. I think these do a really good job, because it's easy for us to sit here and say it because we were here, we lived it, we've seen it, right? But
Sure.
you can kind of see it playing out over time in the culmination of these slides here, right? I mean, there's a theoretical, and I don't know what the exact ratio is, but there's a theoretical, appropriate level of support per the amount of service that you're providing. And whatever that theoretical number is, you can obviously see it deteriorating over time. And it's hard to point at any one year in these slides and say, that's the year where something went wrong, right? It's just over time. And it's
How many staff members were in the finance department when you got here?
goodness. So when I got here, the director of finance position had been eliminated.
Wow.
There was no other manager or supervisor in the department other than myself when I got here. There was a single accountant who was also the entire HR department for the city. We were plugging holes with consultants. We were not able to do well or at all some very basic things, just kind of the baseline responsibility of finance, right? We weren't able to track project spending and budgets very well by funding source. Our efficiency of being able to enforce budget control was poor. There's a list of things that we could go over. But suffice it to say, we needed more heads and more technology just to fulfill our baseline role of what we needed to do here.
Yeah, revenue. So in my mind, Yucaipa really has a revenue problem, much more so than a spending problem. Now, the city had been spending tens of millions of dollars on projects, but really starving the organization, right? And that comes with great risk, we do have a revenue problem, and we have a sales tax consultant, HDL, who we have quarterly meetings with, and we go over the sales tax figures. And they provide a graph for us every quarter of where Yucaipa stands in relation to our neighbors in terms of our sales tax generation. Let's put that up on the screen. I think we have that. So this is interesting. That dark line, second to the bottom, that's the city of Yucaipa in terms of sales tax revenue. The other lines are our neighbors. The only one of our neighbors lower than we are is the city of Highland. And by the way, that's about to change because they just got a Costco. Costco's going in there. So Yucaipa is lower than the city of Banning, lower than the city of Calamasa, much lower than the city of Redlands, much lower than the city of Loma Linda, and hugely lower than the city of Beaumont.
Damn.
Right? Why is that? Well, if you think about it, we don't have a lot of the big things that bring revenue that most cities rely on. We don't have the big regional shopping centers, the big box stores, the auto malls, right? We have some gas stations, we have some mom and pop restaurants, some fast food, and those things do bring revenue. And we have development on the way. Our economic development department, I'll call it a department, even though it's one individual, Ryan Miller, who does a phenomenal job, has been working hard in bringing new businesses in. We have Yucaipa Point on Yucaipa Boulevard down by the freeway that's bringing lots of shops and restaurants, and that is helping. But our expenses have been growing faster than our revenue has been growing. And so ultimately, if we want to fix this, we have to have additional revenue sources, whether that's, additional or new commercial development in a significant way, whether that's, tax revenue. This has to get fixed.
Yeah. You've mentioned it over and over that Yucaipa has a revenue problem, and I think that's another thing that when you first told me that, I chuckled. From a finance director side, it was maybe the first time that I had heard that, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. And the more and more that I think about it is, and going on the roadshow and listening to people how much they like the services that are provided. Don't cut this, don't cut that, and I trying to explain, but based on the funding, we're doing too much. And I think your point is, I'm finally coming around to it, that, yeah, we have a revenue problem. We can't fund the stuff that we're doing, and we're doing good things, but we can't fund it. And if the community would like us to continue to provide those good things, we have a revenue problem, and we need the community to
we
help
built a
us fix
machine.
that.
Now we have to support it, right?
Yeah.
And yet the knee-jerk reaction, from the public, and it's not just here, it's everywhere, is distrust and, okay, well, you're wasting money, or tighten your belt and fix the problem. So we have, it's not the city's role to advocate politically, right? There is a measure on the ballot. We are not and cannot go out and tell people we think you should vote for or against this measure, right? What I think we do have an obligation to do is explain the reality of the situation, explain the numbers, explain the facts, and let people know what the choice is.
Absolutely.
And ultimately it will be a community decision. We've tried very hard to do that. One of the ways we tried to do that is we rolled out this video titled Yucaipa Community to Crossroads. We sent that out an email to our email list. We put it out on social media. It has been viewed over and over and over again. And yet, we still hit some lack of trust in the community. We had a town hall meeting last week, and one member of the public stood up, and I think we have that video clip. Let's play that.
On the other hand, the video is threatening, and it's not helpful. It's not selling anything.
Yeah. So, and we've heard similar comments, but, first of all, you have to take things with a grain of salt. Every community has their groups and individuals who are, harsh critics of the city. And the individual we saw in that video is perhaps the city's harshest critic, right? And so there's that. But that point has been made by others that we feel threatened when you tell us, here's what will happen if the measure doesn't pass, right? And it's certainly not meant as a threat. I think it's meant as to present a clear choice. And these aren't made up consequences. The city council passed a resolution that outlined exactly what would happen, what cuts would have to be made. And the idea there was, let's make sure the community understands what the choice is.
Yeah. One of the comments was, you're not selling anything. And that's a statement of fact. We are not. We're educating,
absolutely,
going through the process. the fine line between advocating and educating, it really the selling is what changes that. I like the city of Yucaipa. I live in the city of Yucaipa. I like the services that Yucaipa provides. A more positive approach or a more positive message might be, hey, help us, rally behind us and help us fund the services that we're providing, right? And so that's essentially that's what we're saying is we like Yucaipa, we like the services of Yucaipa. Let's rally together and fund these services. And then that crosses the line of are we advocating or educating? And we're just saying, hey, if you like these services, fund them. If you don't like these services, we have to cut them.
Well, and I think, former members of the city council have stood up and recently in a letter to the editor, a former mayor of the city submitted a letter that talked about, look, here are all the great things that the city spends money on, right? And I think we can all agree that they're great things. Yucaipa is a special community for a lot of reasons, but one of the big reasons is that we prioritize public safety. We spend big on public safety. We prioritize sense of community. We spend big on community services. If you go to Highland, you go to Calamasa, you go to almost any other city in the region, you are not going to see those level of services. So the question really is, do we want to keep doing that, right? We can cut back. But we're going to have to cut back on all those things that make Yucaipa special that the people say they like. Let's put that letter to the editor up and walk us through it here, Phil.
Yeah, I agree with former Mayor Riddell. He opens it up with some of his background, but then he goes through a list of all the wins over the course of time, and talks about the general plan, civic buildings being constructed, good roads, parks, bridges, flood control channels and basins, a preserved open space, built many parks, recreational facilities while creating a safe, debt-free city that provided good municipal services with excellent police protection, fire suppression, and skilled paramedic services. And I have a couple of reactions when I read that. One is I'm proud to live in Yucaipa, and I agree with all of those things, and I remember a lot of those things as they came on board, and some of the things that just kind of crept up, like the police services, fire services, paramedic. There's no complaints on the delivery of those services, and it's a long list of things. As a finance director, I have a different consideration when I read that. I see cost, and cost.
Right.
But they're all true. It's a list of all the wins over the course of a long period of time. And then I think of, okay, what's missing from that? The funding of those things, the ongoing funding and that's what we're talking about today. We're not saying that those things don't exist. No, they do exist. And that's why I chose to live in Yucaipa. And that's what makes Yucaipa awesome.
Right.
We have a new decision to make now of how do we fund these things in the future.
Right. Or do we fund them?
Right.
And look, the city council met in kind of an emergency meeting in May of last year where we raised the red flag on this looming budget crisis. And we asked the question, okay, council, do you want to slam on the brakes and cut spending now? Do you want to cut these programs and because we've got this deficit, or do you want to continue, with the current practice, current level of services, current programming, take a year, take 2 years, figure out the long-term solution, because we're not out of cash in the bank, right? We're not insolvent, right? We have runway. Mm-hmm. Do you want to use that runway, figure out what the long-term solution is, and then implement that, or do you want us to start cutting right now? And the direction of the council was very clear. It was no, business as usual. Take a year or two. Let's study this thing. Let's figure out what our options are, and that's what we've done. But that's not to say that we haven't taken measures to tighten the belt as much as we possibly could in the interim, up to the point of having to cut service levels, right? But we've done quite a few things to reduce expenses, and let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So as we go through the holding service levels where they're at, the best we could get to as we went through the process is over $7 million of an operating deficit this year. That's not to say that it's a blank check and everybody's spending whatever they need. No, when we started this process, the first go through when department submitted everything, the ask was going to put us in a deficit position of over $15 million.
I thought that was a typo when I first saw it.
I was hoping that we had brackets on it and it was actually a surplus. It was not. It was a real number.
Yeah.
And as we go through those things, it's not a wasteful spending. It's and in order to effectively and efficiently deliver services, that's the cost of operating the city of Yucaipa. And so as we went through that and said, hey, we've had the directive from council to hold service levels, but we've got to, what can we do this year to whittle that down? And so we went through an exercise going back to the departments to say, hey, what can we cut? What can we defer? What can we just kick out and not do? And so we whittled that down to 7.3, but some of the big items were on the public safety side, an elevated level of.
I think we should have a slide that shows that.
Yeah, there we go. And so this is based on holding the service levels. We were at an over $15 million deficit. The public safety personnel was really that's new personnel, not existing personnel. We didn't cut existing personnel. But that new personnel that was requested is a paramedic squad, and so that was put on ice at least for this year to say, hey, we can't ramp up service levels. We're holding them steady. Kick that one out. Public safety vehicles was another again not existing, but the usefulness of the existing ones is getting towards the end of its useful life, and so we need to put those in reserve and replace them. Those things were kicked out, and across the board, not only public safety, but a lot of the vehicle replacement, things like that, were deferred till later. All the way down through, we prioritized our capital spending, and we said, okay, we're not funding any capital out of the general fund, and as we went through that, we made, I think, one exception of a couple of tens of thousands of dollars for a specific thing. But other than that, we said no, the general fund is isolated from any capital spend, and we went through that. On the staffing side, we to the best that we could, we said, all right, with existing staff, going back to the lean and mean, if we can cross over and use staff to do multiple things, do that. But also any vacant positions that were deemed non-critical, those were left unfilled. We also defunded 5 positions that are authorized by council, but the positions have been defunded and pulled out of the budget. So
this is a list of items that in all reality are needed, right? But we just decided not to put in the budget. And I think actually that part of the budget, meaning those costs that didn't make it into the budget, actually hold an important piece of the puzzle for anybody who's asking that question, how did we get here, and are surprised by that, right? Because I think one of the things I noticed after I got here was that there was a lot of focus placed on the general fund budget. Maybe I'll call it hyper focus, and I don't want to imply that the general fund budget is not important. However, if you look at only the general fund budget with blinders on, you're not seeing the whole picture, right? The general fund budget alone by itself is not a good indicator of overall financial health of the city. And I think that might be a component of why some people feel surprised, right? There was this focus on just so long as we get the general fund budget to balance, the city is good, right? But what you're not realizing are there things that don't even make it in there, right? There's the cost of staffing that you should have, but you don't. There's the cost of maintenance that you should be doing, but you're not, and you can make a list, right? And so for that reason and many others, if you focus just on the general fund budget, which can be made to balance through significant cuts for a period of time, if you focus on that to the exclusion of other important elements of financial health, then you're going to miss the bigger picture.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, there is an awful lot that this city should be doing that we're not. A lot of the things that we deferred this budget cycle had been deferred for many years prior. Look, we have fire engines that are practically duct taped together at this point, right? I mean, they are going down for service so frequently. Thank goodness we have a contract with an organization as large as CAL FIRE, and they can help us, bring in other resources to fill in the meantime, or we'd really be in trouble. But we can't keep doing that forever. We're going to have to get to a point where, those engines have to be replaced. Buildings have to be maintained. personnel are going to have to be hired, and you just can't keep kicking the can down the road forever.
Yeah, you can't. And with that, the 7.3, as we're having the dialogue, the natural reaction is, okay, you're giving me a challenge to solve a $7.3 million problem. This is how we can do that. Well, the $7.3 million is what we whittled it down to. We're over $15 million based on how we're organized, how we've been organized. That's what it takes. And so we've got a much larger problem that we're trying to solve than a $7.3 million one-time budget deficit.
Much bigger.
And
and that's one of the reasons why, we've looked at every avenue for increasing revenue and cutting down on expenses. We've looked through every contract the city has practically, right? Look, is there a way that we can rework this contract? A lot of people talked about the contract with our waste hauler, Burtec, and recently that agreement has been redone to increase the franchise fee that's paid. That change will bring an additional $2.2 million every year into the city, but that does increase ultimately what people pay every month for that service. It'll go up about $7.65 a month for the basic 60-gallon trash can service. Which is the size that most people have. And so some people have said, well, look, you just increased that. Now you're asking for a tax increase. Well, no, it's all part of the bigger puzzle. The sales tax will bring an estimated $6 million a year. Well, this year we've got a $7.3 million deficit, right? What do you think it's going to be next year with additional revenue? So the sales tax measure is critical if we want to solve the budget deficit issue without making massive cuts, right? But it certainly isn't the only piece of the puzzle. There has to be other elements as well.
yeah, the big one obviously is Measure S. But yeah, along the way is the city, based on the directive of council to, hey, let's fix this on the revenue side. We're there's no stone left unturned. We're looking all over, and that's a big chunk. The franchise fees for the waste hauler, that's a significant piece too. And so, but going back to the idea, we're not solving a $7 million problem. We're solving a much bigger problem to make sure that these things are appropriately funded and sustainable going into the future.
Is there any more fat that can be cut, right? If the residents say to us, no more revenue, right? Let's pull back up that support services slide again, right? Where's the fat that we can cut without additional revenue?
Yeah, so I'd say no, there's none. And this indicates that that conversation of cut the fat. I think the Yucaipa way is fat equals support services, and it doesn't. But Yucaipa has always gone to
I
that
am
well.
considered support services. I see what you're getting at.
No, I'm not that clever. I'm not that clever, but that's funny. And so Yucaipa historically has gone to that well of support services to say, hey, take it out of support. Like we need more services. When people say, hey, cut the fat, they're not saying, hey, we need less cops on the street. They're saying cut support services. Right. And so no, there's no more. We're inflation adjusted at 26% decrease in over the 22 years. We're a much bigger place. While the city's not beyond criticism on how it's implemented and all of that, yeah, whatever. That there's no fat there certainly isn't. We're under supported, and that's not me saying that. That's a graph that's based on audited financials over 2 decades.
Yeah, and think about how the world has changed since then too. I mean, IT rolls into this. I mean, you remember what computers and technology was 20 years ago. I mean, that's a cost that should have gone up way faster than the cost of inflation, just because the need for security and IT support is just way higher than it was.
Yeah.
Back in, I think MySpace was invented back early in that graph.
2003.
Yeah.
MySpace.
Yeah.
Was the first year of MySpace, 2003. And so you think of not only from a social media standpoint, but from a municipal operation. We're just wrapping up a multi-million-dollar implementation of accounting software that's rolled up into these numbers. And so when we say, man, the world has changed, technology has significantly changed, and that rolls into support services. And so,
what's kind of sobering for me is that the fact that we could lay off every support staff person in the city, the entire staff administration, it wouldn't solve the problem.
No.
If this problem cannot be solved through cuts alone unless we're cutting deeply into public safety, right? That's really the bottom line.
Yeah, we can't start the conversation with support again. The city has done that over 2 decades. Has started the conversation with squeeze support. We can't. We've got to have the conversation of, hey, where do you want to ramp down service levels, and that's the start of the conversation, and then support will adjust. Support's not too good to be involved in the conversation. These cuts would be across the board, and there's a significant amount on the council resolution that hits this. But the conversation has to start with what services does the community want to ramp down.
Right. No, absolutely. So as we've been out in the community, we've gotten a lot of questions. We've seen a lot of comments and questions on social media, and we'd like to touch on some of those because I think it's important for people to hear answers to those questions. And if we're hearing it, when we're out in the community, you can be sure that a lot of other people are thinking it. So let's dive in here. One thing we get a lot. So we have a department in the city called Governmental Affairs, and that department does a lot. It houses our public information officer or PIO. It also handles our grant programs. Works with our lobbyists in Sacramento and in Washington D.C. Works regionally, locally here. One thing, the city takes part in regional organizations like San Bernardino County Transportation Authority, Omnitrans, Southern California Association of Governments, or SCAG, and we have members of our city council that sit on those boards and go to those meetings. Well, someone has to prepare the council members for that, study the issues that are going to be brought up so that the city's, Yucaipa's interests are represented. So Governmental Affairs Department handles those things. I think we have a quote or a post. All right, look at this. Okay, this is Chris Phillip. Wipe out the PIO, Public Information Officer, aka paid spin doctor, and his budget, and that will save over $1 million annually. Okay, well that's true. Our budget for governmental affairs is about $1.1 million this year. That is not all the public information officer, though, right? The public information officer is one staff position. The whole department, everything the department does this year is $1.1 million. So I think that's the first thing. I mean, I think if you look at salaries in their entirety in that department, it's under $400,000 a year. I think it's
I think it's 30%.
Yeah, 30%, right? But what else is in there? So let's say let's play this game and let's say, okay, we're going to eliminate that department. Okay, so we save $1.1 million. That department applies for our grant funding. When grants are received, they manage our grant funding. In the last 2 years alone, that department's probably brought in, I don't know, $12 to $15 million in grant money, right? The library project alone, we're hoping to be able to build a new library, but the city's running a deficit, so we can't just write a check for $18 million. We did get, before either you or I were here, the city was awarded $9 million in grant money from the state library system, which is phenomenal. But it's a matching grant. Mm-hmm. And when I arrived here, the city did not have a plan for where the $9 million match would come from. So our governmental affairs department went to work, and they worked very hard with partners in the region to come up with that money. $4 million committed by the County of San Bernardino Executive Office, $1 million directly from Supervisor Don Rao, right? $1 million from San Manuel, the Indian tribe, very generous. Working with our partners at the school district who are putting in the land. Well, none of those things just fell in our laps. That was a lot of work, right? So there's $6 million just right there, right? In addition, we have appropriations from the federal and state level, right? Congress. Our department here has worked hard with Congressman Orbanoti's office, and they have secured millions of dollars for our Wildwood Canyon Interchange project, for our Wilson 3 Basin projects. So that department goes away. We're no longer seeking those millions and millions of dollars worth of funding. And we probably have to give back a lot of the grants we've already received because, grants come with a lot of paperwork, a lot of reporting requirements. that department make sure that we're keeping up to speed with all those requirements. And so, if we want to continue getting grant money, if we want to manage those grants, and then in working with our regional partners like SBCTA and Omnitrans, well, the Wildwood Canyon Interchange project, we're not the lead on that project; it's SBCTA, and so. If we want to make sure that funding is being put into place for projects like that in Yucaipa, then someone has to do that work, right? And so, I think a lot of people don't recognize what goes into the mix here in the city. And in that department, yes, it's a new department in that we created a new title, but really, almost all of those functions were already being done for years in the city. They were just spread out through different departments, right? We even have a department called the non-department department here in the city, which has been kind of a catch-all. If we can't figure out where else to put it, we put it in the non-department department, right? So some of these functions were there. Some of them were in the city manager's department. And we said, okay, let's create something called governmental affairs. It'll house our PIO function. It'll house our grant function. It'll house our state and federal lobbying functions. It'll house how we interact with our partners in the region, our surrounding cities, and the regional organizations like SBCTA and Omnitrans and SCAG, and all of that work is done now through that department.
Yeah, it's the whole thing is $1.1 million, which is nothing to sneeze at, and you think of, okay, our whittled down issue this year is $7 million, and so yeah, but it keeps coming up, and we've on the road show we've had a fun time throwing Joe under the bus and agreeing with everybody. Yeah, eliminate the PIO and chant for Joe's head on a stick. But as we go through this, I mean, big picture, this is the PIO, the position or you mentioned the library grant. There was a PIO on staff in the city of Yucaipa, and he was the one that was administering that award. And so Joe is not the first PIO that the city of Yucaipa has had. Governmental affairs, the department is new, but we had a PIO before. We had costs associated with lobbying efforts and all the things that you had mentioned. We had those other places, and we put them into what we call governmental affairs. And this year it's a $1.1 million budget. Now, the other component that I like to mention as people ask me that is different city managers have different personalities and different management styles. And for a long time, we had an engineer as a city manager. And the personality was, hey, let's build projects. And there's some really fantastic projects that have been built over the course of time. Your personality is you're not an engineer. You're more on the communications and the media side. And so when we look at the cost of what does that mean with the updated and renewed sense of communications, everything that rolls into governmental affairs, all of that communication. There's a new effort. If we had costs already, I don't even know. I did not go back and look, but I'm guessing, I don't know. Let's call them half the costs were already there, just called something different, and then we added more with the focus. Well, if it's half the cost and we're talking $500,000 versus our capital chart that says we're spending well over $10 million a year on the focus of building stuff over the course of time, I would say that based on the numbers, it's a drop in the bucket, and it's nothing to sneeze at. 1.1 to total $1 million budget, and we need to be smart with that. If $500,000 of that is new and the priority of the city manager to say, hey, we need to do a better job with communications. We need to do a better job with public information and make that a push. Great. And then I look at that as saying, okay, operationally, that's a drop in the bucket compared to building a new whatever. And so, so all of that kind of comes into play.
And to your point, I do believe that as local government, we have an obligation to be transparent.
Right.
We have an obligation to communicate to the public. Mm-hmm. That's something we hear constantly. I didn't know about that. When I got here, there was a very controversial project called Serrano Estates. And a number of people in the community, particularly in the North Bench, where you live, were very upset about that project. And, I'm not commenting on whether it was a good project or not. People can legitimately have different ideas about that. But what struck me is that no one had heard about that project until the very end of the process. In fact, there was a bigger concept going on called the Wine Country Specific Plan that became hugely controversial. The city had been working on that for years. There was a committee that met for like 2 years on that. And yet a lot of people in the North Bench that lived right there by it had never heard of it, right? We have to do a better job in local government of communicating. And part of the problem is that people receive their information differently today than they used to, right? Not everyone reads the newspaper every day, right? We can't just send press releases out anymore. We have to be more creative. People want video. They want short video. They want long video. They want infographics, right? And so we have to do a better job at local government of telling our story, talking about the work we're doing in the community, and not just communicating one way, but a two-way dialogue, right? Getting feedback. And you don't get that when you send a piece of mail or when you take an ad out in the newspaper, right? Or you send a press release. It's one-way communication. And so I don't see it as fluff. I see it as part of our responsibility in local government to engage with the community in that way.
Especially with the budget challenges we're dealing with right now, that two-way dialogue is more important than maybe it's ever been.
Agreed. But, a lot of people have said, well, look, everything was fine before, and now all of a sudden we have a problem, right? New council majority, new administration, and now we have a problem. And again, to me, that goes to communication. That's just not the case. There was, however, a video done 4 years ago, the previous city manager, and we have that. Let's watch that.
Hi, my name is Ray Casey. I'm the city manager of the city of Yucaipa. I want to take this opportunity to thank all of you who have attended the city's community outreach efforts regarding Measure E, which, as you undoubtedly know, appears on the March 3rd ballot, and to encourage everyone in Yucaipa to cast your vote. By now, most of you are aware of the fact that the city's paramedic program, which provides 911 emergency services to Yucaipa residents, has been operating in the red for the past 4 years. In addition, based on recent contract changes with represented employees, the Sheriff's Department costs are rising at a faster rate than the city's revenues. During these last 4 years, the city has done everything in its power to avoid having to make cutbacks in these critical emergency services, thus keeping the present level of 911 services in place. During these 4 years, the city has been able to maintain the same levels of service in our paramedic program by using the savings from previous years when the paramedic assessment revenues did exceed expenses, and by drawing down the city's structural fund balance, as well as making some other cuts. Unfortunately, the time has come when this is no longer possible to keep these same levels of service into the future without additional funding. This is the reality that city officials are presently facing, and the reason Measure E has been placed on the local ballot. I want to thank those of you who have shared your thoughts, opinions, and concerns with city officials by providing feedback through social media platforms such as Facebook, Nextdoor, Twitter, Instagram, and through emails. This feedback is truly appreciated. Based upon this feedback, it appears there are few, if any, residents who disagree with the need to maintain these high levels of 911 emergency services that are presently being provided through both the city's paramedic program and the Sheriff's Department. However, it seems the biggest concern that did surface has to do with the funding mechanism that city officials ultimately chose for making the city's public safety budget imbalance whole. We've made a concerted effort to respond to the concern and to explain the rationale that underlies the decision to address this critical situation through a modest increase in the city's sales tax. I assure you, this decision did not come easy. It came only after city officials invested a great deal of study, thought, and effort, including reaching out to members of the community to get citizen input. Most of you undoubtedly now have a clear understanding of the issues surrounding Measure E, so I would just like to take this time to once again thank you for taking an interest in keeping Yucaipa a wonderful place to reside, and to say if you haven't done so yet, please vote on March 3rd. Your vote certainly does matter.
Okay, so this was in March of 2020. That's when Measure E was on the ballot. I'm not sure when this video was released, but March of 2020. And back then, 4 years ago, city manager was saying, without additional revenue, we cannot continue operating at this level of service. Now, March of 2020, what happened right after that?
Yeah, COVID saved the day.
COVID hit, right? And so the world changed, and then, ARPA money came, and the city bought itself a little bit of extra time there, right? And so, for those who say, well, this is a new problem that was caused, in the last 2 years. Well, no, it's not. No, it's not.
No, I listened to that, and I recognize a lot of what's being said, and yeah, that's where we were at then. What's interesting is the peripherals around that, because you looked at the general fund budget and looks fine. Everything looks good, and the kind of the narrative surrounding it is, no, everything's good, but in Yucaipa, a sales tax measure hit the ballot, and that's a big deal, and that's a serious red flag in the community when that happens. And so a different approach this time, and going back to management styles, and while I'm not as appreciative of Ryan as being put out in front of people and saying, hey, respond to this question, respond to that question, it's painful, but the back and forth, that dialogue has been so good, because people ask questions to say, hey, we've heard this before, what's different now? And I'm saying, well, I don't know. It's probably more of the same, but really, this is where we are, and the dialogue and the communication with allowing us to get the graphs out, and nothing's off the table. We're looking at everything to say, hey, here's the trends. Hey, we're inviting people to come in. I'll tell you where I got these numbers. I'll tell you how I created this stuff.
And you and your team did a lot of work to put that puzzle together, right? How did we get here? There was a lot of, in fact. One of your predecessors, Greg Franklin, who I believe had the title of Administrative Services Director, but handled finance for the city, was kind enough to sit down and have multiple meetings. He and I met, but I know you've met with him multiple times, and we really appreciate his. In fact, Greg.
I do. I just met him. I just met him a few weeks ago.
We have a picture to share of you and Greg. Here we go. Oh, look at that.
Look at that.
Now, you were number 7.
I was thinking I was the guy on the left, but yeah, that's me, number 7.
How old were you in this picture, Phil?
Oh, gosh. I'm guessing that I was 10 or 11 years old.
Okay. And Greg was your coach?
Yes, he was.
Wow. That's fantastic. And look at that. City finance directors right there.
Yeah,
Who could have guessed?
Who could have guessed? Yeah, I don't think that I was a better baseball player than a numbers guy at that point in my life.
What position did you play?
On that team, I was a pitcher and a shortstop. Yep.
Oh.
I wish I had that hair still. That's a lot of good hair.
Yeah, those
were the days.
Oh, well, that's great. That's great. One of the special things about Yucaipa.
Yeah. Mr. Franklin, I've known him a long time. As we go through this process, I have great respect for his work over the course of so many years at the city of Yucaipa. And as we're putting this information together, early on, I was bouncing ideas off him to say, hey, this is what I'm seeing. He used terms like disingenuous to me that hurt my feelings. I appreciated the opportunity that he felt free to open up and say, hey, this is why I don't like this. This is what I think you're missing. Mm-hmm. And it gave me a great opportunity to go back and scrub the information, and especially the most recent items, the graphs, things like that. He said, yeah, no, I get what you're saying, and the whole thing makes sense. And so, he's somebody that knows it, lived it, and so somebody that I think it's important to get buy-off from.
Agreed. Process. No, that was fantastic. Let's get back to some more comments that I think we should address. We have one. Let's put it on the screen here. Okay, so this has to do with salaries. The first one: most of Yucaipa still shops outside the city. Is city leadership looking at staff cuts and small increases in wages? And the other similar comment is, how about city staff salary cuts? That's what a lot of residents suggested last time the city asked for input. There are more ways to balance a budget. Why are the only proposals tax increases or service cuts? How about budget cuts that don't involve reducing public safety services? $200,000 salaries are ridiculous for a town this size. So there's a couple things here. First of all, as we've talked about, cutting salaries doesn't solve the problem, first of all. But I do hear a lot, the salaries are outrageous, especially for a city of this size. And I can understand why people feel that way, but do you think that's the case, Phil?
Yeah. So no, but what we do my opinion doesn't necessarily matter in that, but what we do to make sure that we're in line is periodically we'll go through what we call a class and comp study. So they'll look at all compensation for all positions citywide, and then they'll comp that against our peers, and our peers are, in this case, well over 30 different agencies all across not only geographic nearby us, but across the nation, across the state, similar types of cities, also special districts, counties, all kinds of different things, and they'll comp what our compensation is for a certain position against what theirs is, and then they'll take all of those averages and say, okay, this is where you lie. So we're in the middle of one. Councilman Thorpe last year had suggested that, and the city has engaged a third party to go through that, and we're nearing the tail end of that process now. So that's how we established to say, are we in line with what the industry is compensating?
Yeah. And why is it important to be in line with what the industry is compensating?
Yeah. So ultimately, we want talented individuals at the city of Yucaipa. We want good people to provide services, and those services, typically when people say, hey, cut salaries, they're talking about the support, the admin side of the operation. They're not saying, hey, cut cop salaries. They're not saying, hey, cut community services providers salaries. They're saying support salaries. While all of those things are wrapped, not the police for Yucaipa, but community services, all of those things are wrapped up into the class and comp. It's important to be in line based on a directive of council. Does council want to attract a workforce that's a top tier workforce? Do you do that on the compensation side, so they can say, hey, we want to be a little higher so that people come here, or we want to be in line, or we're okay with being lower. It's all based on the directive of city council at that point in time.
Yeah, and we don't have the final report on that, but early indications from the consultant have been that we're pretty much in line, right? I mean, I think there will be some positions that we will see are higher than industry average. There are some that are lower than industry average, but on the whole, we're probably right there in line. And,
yeah, so we have low 80s authorized positions, and yeah, some are high, some are low, and so we can look at that. You can look at it detailed position by position, but yeah, if you look at them all, they also provide the number, average them all together, and this is where you are, and relatively in line is the preliminary results from that.
I've been so impressed with this staff, and I'm not just saying that. I really have been, and I know some positions that are making lower than the same position in other cities, and I've wondered often, what keeps a staff person here when they could easily go make more money somewhere else, or a lot more money in the private sector, right? And I think one of the things, I've said this many times, but one of the things I've noticed that makes the staff here unique is that so many of us live here in Yucaipa, right? A much higher percentage, I believe, than in most other cities. I'd love for us to figure that exact stat out, because I think we'll be impressed with how that. Probably we have more staff members that live in the city than those who do not. Right?
Yeah,
and to me now, living and working here, working in the city where I live, I can tell you, as you could tell me, that it brings a whole nother level of meaning to the job when you're working in the community where you and your family live. And I think that keeps a lot of our staff members here. It's it's nice to have a short commute, but I think it's a lot more than that. It's yes, many of our staff could go make more money somewhere else, but it wouldn't be helping to serve and craft the future of the community where they and their families live, and that's huge. And I don't want to lose that. I think, yes, if we were to artificially keep salaries low or slash salaries, could we do that? Yes. Well, we couldn't do it unilaterally. That has to be negotiated with the Employees Association. Right? That's another thing. But we would lose a lot of the talent here that provides the services.
Yeah, sure. I mean, from being on both sides of this, there's a lot more from an employee standpoint than just comp. It's one component of it, but I know that there's a lot of city staff that live in this town. I know that there's a lot of neighboring city staff that live in this town, and people like Yucaipa. It's a great place to be, and the compensation is one component of it, but it's that blade cuts both ways. I was at the baseball fields this weekend. I was at Autumn Fest this weekend, and walking down the street, I had a friend that was opening a business, and he saw me be questioned by a community member on some things, another guy that I knew, and so then after I got done with that conversation, he looked at me and said, "Hey, Phil, just so you know, this building right here is a safe space. Whenever you need to get away and not answer city questions, you can come and visit my business." And I let him know that I'm not going to buy anything from him, but I'll take him up on that offer. So yeah, it's nice working in your hometown for sure, and so that's a big part of not only the compensation is fine, but for me personally, if the compensation is in line, all the other things other than compensation are why I choose to be employed by the city.
I could not agree more. Let's touch briefly on roundabouts, because this is a comment we get a lot. The city wasted a lot of money on roundabouts. Instead of roundabouts, why don't you spend, balance your budget by not building roundabouts, right? In fact, let's look at a post on that topic. It's always something, and they've never stopped asking for more. It's completely due to mismanagement. That money on stupid roundabouts would sure come in handy now, wouldn't it? Right? I can see why people feel that way. A couple of important facts here, though, is that we don't spend general fund money on roundabouts. We spend restricted money, Measure I money, which Measure I is that half-cent sales tax charged countywide, administered by San Bernardino County Transportation Authority. Some of that money comes back to the city. There's two different pots. There's the arterial funding and then the local roads funding. So arterial is our major roads. So that Measure I arterial money can be spent on projects on our major thoroughfares that increase traffic flow, right? And so very limited on what that money can be spent for. We have a whole discussion about this in episode 2 with Fermin Preciado. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It's a great episode. We talk in depth about roundabouts. But I think what's important here is that, no, that has not contributed to the city's deficit.
Correct. Yeah, that's not part of the operating deficit. Those dollars are restricted for use and different decision process entirely.
Right. Very good. So where are we going with all this, Phil? How are we going to get out of this?
Yeah. So we're ultimately we need the community's help, and that's the deciding on what we want to look like. It's a bad conversation to have, but it's a positive in the sense that not all communities get the opportunity to shape the future of their city, and so we have options, and we're working hard to clearly inform the voters to say here is the option, and so where do we head once we establish, okay, this is what the community wants, this is how we're going to get there. At that point, we are taking the additional steps to say, okay, how do we never have this conversation ever again?
Before we talk about that, because that's going to be very important, right? I mean, I think the community needs to know that we're working to solve this problem and then never get into this position again, right? But it's important that the community understands that when the city council voted to place Measure S on the ballot, they also at the same time passed a resolution that laid out pretty specifically what cuts would have to be made if the additional revenue is not approved by the voters.
Yeah.
Right? And again, this isn't meant as a threat, but I think it's very important that the community understands what the choice is so that they can make that choice. So we're gonna pull up that list. The resolution itself, and you can look this up on the city's website. It's resolution number 2022-42, and it outlines cuts in a number of areas. So let's pull that up. $4 million of the cuts come from public safety, right? $2 million from our contract with the sheriff's department, and that comes primarily through the elimination of 5 to 7 sheriff deputy positions that are part of that contract. It calls on us to close one of our 3 fire stations, specifically fire station number 2. It is our lowest volume call station. And then, of course, the savings really comes from eliminating the firefighter positions that are currently assigned to that station. So that's $4 million in cuts to public safety. And then we move on to community services. Closing the senior center, which would be $300,000 annual savings. Closing the 7th Street pool, which would be another $300,000 of annual savings. Shutting down YPAC programming. Not all programming, but we identify the programs that do not achieve full cost recovery, and we eliminate those programs which will save about $250,000 a year. Same thing at the community center. Cut the programming there. The programs that don't achieve full cost recovery, that's another $250,000. An additional $900,000 in cuts to community services to be determined. And that's going to look like a lot of programs shutting down, and a reduction of staff that will cut across, pretty much all services provided by the Community Services Department. Development services, elimination of $1 million of net costs, costs to be determined. That'll have an impact. You come to the counter and you need any kind of service, permit to put up a carport, a swimming pool, solar panels, whatever it is. It's going to take a lot longer. Our staff will probably get pretty backed up there. Elimination of $1 million in support services to be determined. And we've talked a lot about support services today. We're already extremely thin there. So, and then of course, these cost-cutting measures identified are to include freezing of any vacant non-critical positions, and then negotiating a combination of layoffs and furloughs with the Yucaipa City Employees Association. So drastic across the board impacts to the organization and to services in the community. As we discussed, we're at the point now where we cannot cut back anymore without it impacting services.
Right. Yeah. So one way of looking at that list is I agree with you. It's not a threat. It's educating to say this is what we're looking at. One way to look at it would be if council gave us a different directive this year and said, hey, we're not going with a $7.3 million deficit. We're balancing this year. Those are the cuts that would have had to have been made to balance, and we would have already done those things. Council gave us the rope to say, okay, work with the community on how everybody wants to move forward. And so that's what we're doing now. Those cuts on that list are painful, and they're significant. Some of them are identified in the community services and public safety, but those to be determined amounts, those are on the development services side. It's over 10% of the cost. 10% is getting cut, and it's at this point it's where do we find that 10% that's going to get cut? We don't know. On the support side, it's closer to 20% of a already too lean support.
Right.
Like, we're going to cut another 20%. Yeah. Well, how are we going to do that?
Well, we could take it out of the city council salaries.
Yeah.
So we for those of you who don't know, we have a post on that. Let's take a look at this. This is a good one. Let the council and mayor give up their salaries. They talk about everyone else giving or giving up, but you never see themselves offering up their salaries. Phil, how much does a city council member make each month?
$650 American dollars a month.
A month. So it's a stipend of $650. That's not. Will that solve the budget deficit?
I'm not a numbers guy, but I'm going. No.
Maybe that's the problem.
No, that's not it's not even a drop in the bucket. Our city council members are not they have a stipend of $650. They're not compensated.
And in fact, based on a recent change in state law last year, we brought to the council an option to increase their stipend significantly. And I don't remember the exact number. I think it was maybe as high as $1,600 a month. And the council declined to take that pay increase.
Yep. Yeah. I think they said not the right time frame to even talk about it. Move it.
Yep. So that's right. A lot of people say, why don't we sell the YPAC? I think we have a comment to that effect to look at. It's madness what they're doing with their tax dollars. Sell the YPAC immediately. That was criminal to allow that to go way out of budget. Audits each quarter with public funds statements being made available. Okay. Well, we do audits, not quarterly, but every year. We're required by law to have an independent audit, which we do. But selling the YPAC is interesting. So. With cost recovery efforts, the YPAC is still a net cost for the city each year. This year, it's about $500,000, so not as bad as it used to be. But I think one of the challenges with selling a facility like that is that in order to sell it, you have to have a willing buyer, right? And on the front end, the city spent was it close to $20 million building the YPAC. So we have that investment of tax dollars. I do not think we would find a buyer for anywhere close to that. Part of the problem is that, that facility was not built with cost recovery in mind. There are only 300 seats inside, right? So it's very hard to bring in big acts and to pencil shows. that being the case, it's probably very difficult to find someone who's willing to come and buy it. And then, of course, there are community impact issues. You know, are we willing to accept loss of total control over programming there? What functions are brought inside and outside? That would be a big decision for the community to make. Our hope is that $500,000 net cost will continue chipping away at that. But selling a YPAC certainly doesn't solve the problem. Drop in the bucket doesn't come close to solving the problem. And even if we wanted to sell it, I highly doubt we'd find a willing buyer.
Yeah, it's the YPAC is it's an amenity that we call that one a sunk cost. It's been built. That decision's been made. The number of seats inside it, that those decisions have been made, but it's very limiting to not only to get what the fair market value of it is, but also it's very limiting from our staff to operate that for cost recovery because of the way it was designed, because it was designed intentionally as a community benefit, not to break even. Now, an external buyer would say, yeah, but it's not designed to make money, so why would I buy it if I can't make money? And the city to say, okay, now we're going to really try our best to make it break even. We can do that, but the cards are stacked against us in the sense that it wasn't built to do that. So we can do our best to do so, but it's important for the community to remember that the whole the building of the YPAC was as a community benefit. It's right smack dab in Uptown. It's an anchor in Uptown Yucaipa, and it's a spot to bring in the community and have things like Autumn Fest, where it's a feel good for the community. And so the programming issues for sure, and giving up the control to an external party, that doesn't make sense to me from a community standpoint. And it's important to say, to understand that it wasn't designed that way, and the community has to understand that there's things that the city does that are just costs, and that's probably one of them, to say, yeah, we're going to do our best to break even, but there's always going to be a net cost because of the good feeling that it provides to the community, and we're gonna program it to the best of our ability to make it break even, but it's not intended to be a moneymaker or break even. It's intended to make Yucaipa, add to the ambiance of Yucaipa.
Yeah, so. No, agreed. So, Phil, we simply cannot continue deficit spending year after year.
Right.
Next year, fiscal year 2025, 2026, we will have a balanced budget. One way or the other, our budget will be balanced. Whether that is an approved Measure S and other measures that produce revenue, whether that is Measure S fails and we make sweeping across-the-board cuts to services, one way or the other, the budget will be balanced. So take us to fiscal year 26, fiscal year 27, fiscal year 28.
Yeah.
How do we make sure we never get back in? Once our budget is balanced, how do we make sure we're never facing this situation again?
Yeah. So yeah, when we started, I was saying financial management is not a set it and forget it type of thing. So each year we would, once we have a strategy from the city council to say, here, this is what Yucaipa is going to do. This is what we want to focus on. At that point, each subsequent year, we would have what we would call a long-term financial plan to say, this is how we're going to peg cost increases to revenue growth so that we don't get out of whack. And those are things that we monitor continuously, not only annually during the budget cycle, but every month we're tracking that stuff to say, hey, are we off? Are we in line? Because if we don't, if we forget it for however long, we come back to it and say, how do we even fix it now? We're providing all these services, but we don't have the revenue. And so it's a long-term financial plan that's in development. A key piece of that long-term financial plan is knowing what our strategy is, right? As an organization, where do we want to go? And so, Ryan, you want to give your analogy of map?
Yeah.
I think you used MapQuest.
I did use MapQuest. It dates me a little bit, yeah. But you can put together your route for a road trip or something, but you got to know where you're going first, right? And so I think in this metaphor, the financial plan is that route. It's that map quest that you print out. But we got to know where we're going first, and I think that's an important part of this dialogue we're having with the community right now. Is we got to shape what this thing looks like, the destination we want to arrive at, and then we can tailor that plan, that map quest to get there.
Yeah. So behind the scenes, we're tuning up the car. We're ready to go. We've got a drivable automobile. We're just waiting to print out MapQuest.
Yeah. I do want to add though, getting a long-term financial plan and an overall strategy, that doesn't mean that we're never going to have to make cuts again, right? Like in general terms, expenses go up faster than revenue, period. And so it doesn't mean that we'll set this, we get a plan, we start moving forward, and then we'll never make cuts again. We're going to have to be monitoring it continuously, and just the nature of how expenses go up faster than revenues. It's hopefully not drastic and severe at any one point in time, but we'll be continually having that conversation of how to keep our expenses under our revenue and having to make those kinds of adjustments regularly.
Yeah. So right now we're at $7 million in a $40 million general fund budget. It's a significant percentage that we're looking at, massive, significant, painful cuts. With the implementation of a long-term financial plan, we would potentially have cuts because we're pegging it based on revenue growth, but we're talking fractions of a percent service level cuts year in and year out to make sure that we're staying under the revenue growth. And so much less painful. It's just our energy is, instead of educating the community, we're implementing the plan and making small cuts behind the scenes based on our long-term financial plan.
It's going to be really eye-opening November 5th to see what the will of the community is. Living here in this city, I think I have a sense of what the priorities are of this community. We have polling that seems to indicate what those priorities are. But the three of us have something in common. Mm-hmm. We all live here in the city of Yucaipa. We don't just work here. We live here. And so, a lot of people, I think, get mad. You're proposing to increase my taxes. Well, yes, mine too, right? No one likes that. And we're not advocating again one way or the other, but we're saying, look, I have an opinion as a resident of Yucaipa of what I want my community to look like, what I want service levels to be for me and for my family. But it's not my job as the city manager to push my opinions on the residents on that matter, right? The community will decide, and we will move forward one way or the other in return. And you're in the same position. In fact, I've been a resident 9 years here. You've been a resident almost your whole life, right? I mean, you went to Yucaipa High School. I heard you were the quarterback of the football team in Yucaipa High School.
I was, 1993 and 1994.
Wow,
quarterback.
Wow. Yeah, and now your kids are grown up here, and you're coaching your son's little league.
Yeah, some of my 55 kids are grown. I've got a son in little league. I've got a son senior, a son that's a sophomore, and four boys and a girl is what we've got.
I heard an interesting story that you were once ejected from a game for calling the ref a clown. Let's talk about that for a while.
Clown, was that the word?
It's misinformation because in baseball they're not refs, they're umpires.
Oh. I stand
so
corrected.
your story is way off. The ref who's a volunteer and a good friend of mine did eject me, and I subsequently I texted him with an apology. I was totally in the wrong. I stand corrected. And I should not have done that in front of 9-year-old boys or their families, and I feel very bad about that. Thank you for bringing that up.
Well, I'm about to make you feel a little bit better because Ryan, I've got a question to ask you about a picture we found. Let's put that up here on the two. What is going on here?
Whose fault is this?
So now, I heard that you spent some time in Costa Rica. Did you live there for a while, and is that what this is, where this was taken?
Yes and no.
This is, but for people who are listening, this is a picture of Ryan Blackerby with what kind of enormous snake is that wrapped around your neck?
That's an anaconda.
An anaconda. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not a snake guy. I don't know how that happened, but you know, when you're there, you got to take advantage. No, yeah, I did. My family and I got the opportunity to spend quite a bit of time in Latin America in general. Costa Rica was one of them, but also Chile and Peru.
Wow.
This picture is in the Amazon region of northern Peru, so
Okay.
just off the Amazon River.
Very good. Very good. And now you live here in Yucaipa with, tell me about your family. How many kids?
Yeah, my wife and we have 2 kids, and we've been here most recently since 2020.
Okay.
But really, Yucaipa's been home for the better part of 20 years. So
Fantastic.
My mom moved here back, and I think it was 2004, the time I was in college and living the nomadic college life. But this was always the place I came home for those home cooked meals and to get my laundry done. And yeah.
I heard a rumor about you that doesn't seem consistent with being an accountant. Do you play in a band?
Okay, who's your source? Who are you talking to? I know you can't find that online. No, I don't now. I did in a different life.
Really?
I did.
What instrument?
Well, I guess it depends on what you're referring to. Maybe who you were talking to. But I back in high school, I sang and played guitar in a Christian rock band, and I also played a woodwind instrument in the less cool type of band, but.
If I had known this, I would have asked you to bring these instruments and demonstrate here on the next time.
Glad you didn't.
Next time. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for being here. It has not been an easy task that you've been presented with. I know, Phil, you started in November of 22, and there's been a lot of rapid change since you got here, and then all of a sudden being thrown right into a financial crisis, but you're doing a heck of a job. And the residents are lucky to have you. And I know that putting you out there on the road show it was the right call because no one wants to hear from me. Right? So you're doing a great job, and we're going to turn the ship around one way or the other. Yeah. And bright future ahead for the city of Yucaipa. Yeah, I'm confident of it.
I am too. I think that it's a great opportunity for the community. I think the more and more of the roadshow things that we have, I think that the community is feeling like there's an open dialogue back and forth, and Yucaipa is always gonna be okay, and we're gonna land in a better spot, whatever that is, and we'll figure it out as a community. So.
Right. Well, and thank everyone for joining us for episode 3 of Yucaipa 360. Tune in 2 weeks. So we're dropping every 2 weeks now on Tuesday morning, every 2 weeks. So 2 weeks from now, we're going to have a special Halloween episode. We're going to feature the owners of the pumpkin patch. There's a lot to dive into. Yeah, very scary. A lot to dive into there. Also, if you are listening or watching this episode the week that it drops, then this coming weekend is the Five Winds Country Music Festival. And it is phenomenal. It's going to be amazing. The lineup's incredible. If you have not been, this will be just the 3rd year. So if you didn't go year 1 or year 2, it's like a mini stagecoach. But it's very Yucaipa. It's country music. It's beautiful surroundings. It's camaraderie, on a scale that is enjoyable, not the craziness that has become, Stagecoach or Coachella, right? It's so go on the city's website, get tickets. I'm sure they'll still be available right up until the 11th, it's the 11th and the 12th. So please check that out. And thank you for watching and listening to Yucaipa 360.